Well, hello there. I hope this take works because I'm almost out of coffee. It's been a while since I posted one of these videos, and that's because I was on vacation, but I am back now. And I'm excited because as a church, we are going through the Gospel of Mark. We, of course, don't have enough time to get through the Gospel of Mark because we're going to try to be done by Easter. So my hope and plan is to use these videos to kind of fill in the gaps, background stuff, and maybe some of the sections that we don't hit on Sundays. So we're going to talk about Mark. We're going to talk about the author of Mark here in just a little bit. But first, I want to back up a little bit because I have been on vacation. A couple weeks ago, the first Sunday of the year, I asked you to make 2-minute commitments instead of New Year's resolutions. And I brought up an author. His name is James Clear. And James Clear wrote a book. And I've had that book on my reading list for a long time. But writing the sermon, of course, gave me the kick in the pants to order his book and finally read it. So I did that. And over the years, I have read several books on habit formation and on the brain science of habits. But this book was by far the most practical and clear book that I have ever read on the topic. He just is really easy to read, and he has wonderful tips on how to be successful in either breaking or forming a new habit. His book is by no means a Christian book or religious book, but it is a helpful book if you are looking to kick a bad habit or create a new habit. And so just thought I would share that with you. His book is called Atomic Habits by James Clear. While we're on the topic of habits, that Sunday we celebrated Derek's reading of Scripture. And I found an infographic that I'm going to link here in the post. It's an infographic that shares how much time it takes to read through each book of the Bible and the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I think it says something like, you have more time to read Scripture than you really think, which I tried to share that Sunday, but my math was really bad. But I think you get the idea. So there's a link in that. And fun fact, since we're talking about Mark, I think it says Mark takes an hour and 20 some minutes. I would have said an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours at most. But either way, that's not long. And we're going to provide resources for you so you can make sure to read through it all by the end of our time together with Mark. But you could actually just sit down and read through Mark with your family or maybe some socially distanced friends. Julie and I have read through the Gospels with groups of people, and it's really a neat experience. Because remember, our Scripture wasn't really meant to be read, 10 verses at a time by ourselves in our bedrooms. It was meant to be read in the context of community and as one cohesive story. So just something to think about. Now, we just passed Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Weekend. And if you're like me, maybe you've read a lot about Martin Luther King Jr., you've heard about Martin Luther King Jr., you've had to watch his speech for class or something. But I wonder if you've taken time to read Martin Luther King Jr. I believe that Martin Luther King was a prophetic voice, and prophetic voices are meant to be heard and read and acted upon. So I want to encourage you to maybe honor Martin Luther King Jr. by just reading something. There's a lot of resources online, but also in our library, I happened to notice that we have a book. It's a book called Strength to Love by Martin Luther King Jr. Now, this is my copy, and I think the church one looks a little different, but it's a great book. It's a collection of sermons, so you don't even have to worry about getting through the whole book. Just pick it up and read through one or two of his sermons, and I think you will see quickly why he was such a powerful voice. Okay, let's talk about Mark. So, who wrote the Gospel of Mark? Well, church tradition from real early on says that a guy named John Mark wrote the Gospel of Mark. And we read about John Mark in Acts. You can read about him in Acts chapter 12 and 13 and 15. And he hangs out with Peter and Barnabas and Paul. And then he actually gets into an argument with Paul. So very interesting stuff. But tradition says that this was written by him, but that it was Peter's account. So Peter gave his account of walking and journeying with Jesus, and then John Mark wrote it down. Scholarship tends... Oh, and what's really interesting about this is that Mark's gospel does not paint the disciples in a good light at all. I mean, as we read through it, you will discover the disciples just don't come off looking good. But Peter still doesn't look good, but he looks way better than he does in the other gospels. I think that's kind of interesting. So most scholars believe, almost everybody believes, that this is the earliest written gospel that we have, and most scholars date it somewhere between 65 AD to early 70 AD. I am an advocate for later, for after 70 AD, and I will tell you why, but not until after Easter. So I think that's all I'm going to tell you about Mark today. Now next week I will show you one place that some people think Mark wrote himself into the gospel. We'll talk about that next week. In the meantime, we'll see you Sunday, hopefully. Bye.